All right. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I don't have real exciting activities for us to do. Right now, I'm in Texas. I'm trying to keep my phone from overheating, sitting here in the truck doing this. But I think I've got some information that will help you when you go along with doing your woodworking projects. You can just kind of like shake your heads, yes or no. But how many of you are completing the Measuring Up project? Yep. Okay. Seeing lots of head shakes. Okay, good. I figured it would probably be mostly, first year project, or the Measuring Up project would be who would be participating in this. So I tried to gear it towards you guys. So the first thing I'll talk about, I know Christy talked about like things at the beginning of the books, and you're trying to plan out your project and deciding like leadership activities and things like that. So I'm going to kind of go over things that are specific to your Measuring Up project. So the first thing is, this project is one that's intended for people who have maybe just completed anywhere from 1 to 3 projects. So you can actually take this project 3 years in a row. Okay. Are most of you on your first year taking it? Just a shake of the head. Yeah, most of your first years. Okay, awesome. So you can take it this year, but you can also retake this project 2 more times. So you've probably noticed there is lots of really good information in your book, and that's because it is a multi-year book. So the big thing about your project is that mostly it will be using hand tools. So not power tools. You're using like hand tools like saws and hammers and things like that. Now, with that said, there is an exception to 3 items that you can use that are considered power tools. It's a hand sander, right? So some of you might have like a mouse or an oscillating sander that you have at home. You can use that. You can also use a power drill. And you can also use a what we call jigsaw, or like a saber saw. The big thing about your project is that 90% of the work has to be done by you. Now, when we say that, typically 100% of a project would have to be completed by the 4-H'er, but this one's a little bit different because it's a basic woodworking, a beginner woodworking, and safety is really, really important. You are allowed to have an adult helper, and your adult helper can help you do your actual cuts for you. So they can help do the cuts like on a power tool or something like that, if that's not quite to a point that you're comfortable with. But 90% of the work does need to be completed by you. And ideally, we'd like for you to be able to do it all, but we understand on a beginning project, like safety is really, really important. I'm just going to hit just a little bit on the other woodworking projects. So there's another one that's called Making the Cut. That's the next level up. That's for somebody who's wanting to complete project woodworking years like 4 through 6. And it's also a 3-year project. And in that one, you can use all of the same tools that you used in your first year project, but you can also add on things like your miter saw, or your planer, table saws, things like that. So, maybe one of those, this might be your first year, but you're like, oh, I'm really comfortable with these type of things. I don't necessarily want to take this project for 3 years. You could bump up and take the next one if you're more familiar with the other ones next year. The next level is what we call nailing it together. And those are for project years 6 through 8. So again, it can be taken as a 3-year project. The things that you would add in this would be like a sharpener, a radial arm saw, using maybe like a lathe or a routing table. So you're getting into a little bit more like detail work when you're doing that project area. And then the last 2 projects you have is what they call finishing up, or woodworking master. And this is where you start making like furniture and just really neat projects, but you're coming up with the stuff on your own. At this point, you've already learned how to use all the tools. So that's a very, very advanced project, and would be something that you're going to probably want to wait a little bit with taking. I know that they were talking about like leadership activities. That you guys have to do leadership activities. You could always do a demonstration, even if it's just for somebody in your family this year, demonstrating different types of tools, or maybe demonstrating how to properly nail a nail. That's going to be one that we're going to talk about, because a lot of people think that they know how to properly nail nails, and in fact, they really don't. If you have your 4-H meetings and you're having like a Zoom meeting, then, you could always do a demonstration over that Zoom meeting. Have mom or dad hold the phone for you, or maybe even like pre-record something, add it to your club's Facebook page if they have something along that. I know our 4-Hers did that. We have our own 4-H page, and we had them just record their demonstrations, and then they added those for everybody to see, and that was really neat. All the 4-Hers then could comment about what they saw. So your activity, because it is a 3-year project book, they ask that you complete 7 activities for each year. So there's 21 activities in there altogether. So don't feel like you have to do all 21 areas in 1 year, because that is a lot. Now, if you want to, hey, by all means, that's up to you. But 7 is what they ask you to complete your first year. There's also optional activities that they'll have on the different pages. I encourage you to do those as well, because those just help to hone your skills in. So the first thing we'll talk about is safety, because safety is a really, really big one when we're talking about doing woodworking projects, because it's something that's really neat and it's a great skill to have, but you really need to go about it safely, because you don't want to lose any digits or lose your eyesight. That's not something that's going to come back to you, so you've got to use safety. So the big thing is on this one is really, really, really picking somebody that is going to be a good adult helper for you, and making sure that you're not using, even if it's a hand tool, you're not using any of those things without an adult supervising you. Okay? Does everybody have an adult that they think that could maybe help them out as far as woodworking goes? Awesome. Like I said, I love that you guys are doing this project, and even better that you have somebody that can help you do that too, because like I said, this skill is just amazing to be able to do. So the first thing we'll talk about is PPE, and probably the most important PPE when we talk about doing measuring up, because like I said, it's a hand tool thing, is safety glasses. Making sure that you have safety glasses, and I would recommend not wearing tinted safety glasses, because that can change the light when you're working with your woodworking projects. You want to have clear ones. They sell them at like Walmart or Lowe's or Home Depot, any of those type of places that you can get them. You can even get ones that are like a little bit smaller, where I know some of you are first year members. Sometimes like the ones I would wear might be a little too big for you, but they do have ones that are adjustable, and they have ones that maybe even are a little bit more appropriate just for kids if you look for them. Make sure that you have a good space to work on. Does everybody have feels like a good space, someplace that has, like maybe a work table, or, like you're not too cramped? I mean, I know it's not a big project, but at the same time, you got to have room to be able to move your board around and work with it. You also want to make sure you have good venting. Sawdust can be highly explosive. A lot of people don't necessarily realize that, but if you've got a lot of particles floating around in the air and somebody were to light something, just maybe like a pilot light from a stove or something like that, then it could ignite that. And I tell you, you do not want that type of a flash burn going on there. So make sure that it's well vented. If you've got like a garage, I would suggest opening up the doors. If you have even just like a little box fan just to kind of blow the air out, that's good. If your area is really, really closed in and you don't have a way to have like windows or anything, you may just consider, especially with like this type of project, even just working in your front yard. As long as you have a good, steady work area, that will help you. So I know most of you kind of shook your head. You thought you had a good space. Make sure too that you're keeping your space clean. Now, I know like a project like this with the first year, it's not going to make a ton of dust and dirt and pieces, but you don't want those pieces laying around on the floor. You don't want a lot of dust, because especially on like concrete or places like that, it makes it really slick. And then you slide in or hit something, you've got a saw laying on the table, you put your hand down on it, you slip, it cuts your hand. It's a whole thing. So you want to make sure that you sweep and sweep often and keep your wood shop really clean when you're doing those things. Does anybody have any questions to this point? I know I'm talking kind of fast, but I do want to get through several things with you. So on yours, once you've gotten your safety, you've got your safety glasses, you've got your adult helper, you're starting to, I would recommend that you go through the skills. There's a skill on like each different page, or at the beginning of each different chapter, that's going to teach you how to do the different activities. I would suggest, in addition to reading those, that you also, it's a beautiful thing living in technology, that you would also watch maybe some YouTube videos if you're able to, that go along with whatever particular skill that you're wanting to do. Because I do this even as a teacher, and even though I've taught for 15 years, I've taught woodshop for 15 years, each year I still go through and I watch videos even as simple as like how to hammer a nail. Like, you would be surprised all the different things and tricks that go along with that. So, like, I would suggest watching some videos. My recommendation would be, like, whoever your adult helper is to have them also perform the skill for you. That way they can talk you through it, and then have you perform the skill. And I wouldn't just do the skills like one time. Like, if it's a hammering skill, then I would do the skill like multiple times if you're able to. The more times that you can go through and practice these skills, then you're going to end up training for muscle memory. So, you're like, the next time you pick up a hammer, it's just going to automatically do what you want it to. You're not going to have to think about it. But if you only do it like once or twice, then when you go to make your actual project, then it may be a little shaky doing that. So the more times you can practice those skills, the better off you'll be. Like, if you've got somebody that can give you even just like scrap wood that you can practice on, that would be great. Let's see here, completing it. Keep in mind, I know everybody learns differently. So, like, don't feel bad. Like, if like, it takes you a while to learn how to do, like sawing, or if it takes you a little bit longer to get good at sanding, like, it's just one of those, you just have to practice. And the whole point in taking these projects is being able to learn how to do these. So if you're not, just a superstar at it to begin with, don't worry about it. That's the whole point of doing it, is to learn, and they know that you're not going to be that, that perfect person that the first time that you try to do it. That's okay. So that's why we practice. Each time you do it, you get better. There's even things now after, 25 years of doing woodworking that I'm learning, and different skills myself, like, just practicing and doing that. And so don't feel bad if it's one of those that's like, oh my gosh, like, I feel like I've done this a bunch of times, I'm still not good. Just keep practicing doing it, and you will improve. When you're picking out your woods, you're going to want to, one of the activities I believe in your book is even knowing the differences in wood. Some really popular ones, like if you were to go to Home Depot, Lowe's, Carter's, any type of wood store, is going to be the difference between like pine and oak. A lot of times pine is a really good one for beginners to start with. It's a softer wood, and it's a cheaper wood too. So if you mess up, it's not as big a deal, but it's really easy to hammer into. It's really easy to cut through in comparison to what oak would be. Now, with that being said, oak is absolutely beautiful. It has a really pretty grain through it, so when you stain it, it looks really good. But pine might be something you would want to work with. But there's all kinds of different woods out there that are available. You want to kind of watch like the moisture content of what you're working with. So 80% of mistakes in woodworking can be attributed to there being too much moisture in your wood. And, have any of you guys ever helped anybody or seen somebody do like a deck or some type of outside woodworking project? You've got that like treated lumber, and it tends to have like a wet feeling to it. Well, if you were to try to use that for your project, what's going to happen is over time that wood will dry, and as it dries, then it's going to shrink, and as it shrinks, then it's going to leave gaps between your attachments, and it may even cause it to warp some. So you want to make sure that you do have a dry project, like a kiln dried product. Like I said, usually treated lumber tends to be wet when starting out, but the non-treated, which is what you're going to be wanting to use for your types of projects, will be a drier type of wood. Go ahead.
How do you know that your wood is completely dry? How can you tell?
Usually you can like, they have meters that you can get to gauge it, but you can just feel it too. Like if you go, and I would recommend going to like a bigger lumber store and just kind of walking through it, and walk through like the treated section versus the non-treated section, and you can touch the wood and actually feel the dampness of it.
Oh, wow.
Or you can feel like, oh, okay, this feels dry, like this feels like my kitchen table. You'll be able to tell those type of things.
Thank you.
That was a great question though. Another thing you're going to want to do is you want to keep your blade sharp. And this is important because you're going to be using a handsaw. So I know like a lot of us like to use our power tools. I'm totally guilty of that. But you know, handsaws are one of those, like they've been around forever and ever and ever. And you know, it was grandpa's handsaw. Well, grandpa's handsaw might be kind of dull. So you're going to want to check the blade on that, because what happens is if you have a blade that's dull or not really sharp enough, then it's going to tear your wood and it's going to make it really hard to saw through your project. So, you know, it might be one of those you may have to get new blades for. You may have to just get a new handsaw altogether. But you want to make sure that, you know, it's a sharp blade. It's going to make it easier. It's going to make it more efficient. And it's going to be safer for you, too, trying to use it. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't have that muscle built up super strong. So, like, I need something sharp because I don't have to work at it. I want to be able to just cut through it. All right. So the next one, once you've got your project design, you know, you've decided what you're going to use. And in your book, I didn't touch on this, but in your book, it gives you project suggestions. You can make those projects that are in there, or you can come up with your own that is similar in size and scope. So you might say like, I don't necessarily want to make the napkin holders, but here's another project where it's, you know, kind of basic and I'm attaching it similar and it's asking for similar skills and it's, you know, a smaller type of project. Something like that would be okay as well. But like I said, they need to be similar. So you can use the ones that are in there, or you can kind of freelance a little bit, but they do need to be similar in what it provides. All right, so let's say you have your project cut out and you know you've decided what you're going to do. You've gotten your wood and it's to the, you know, moisture content that you like. It's not leaving wet spots when you know set it down. The next thing that I would suggest is that you work on sanding. And you got to be careful when you sand, because you don't want to sand off too much and round those edges and make it hard to attach to each other. But you also want to make sure that you sand it, because that's going to make your project really nice. So sandpapers come in different types of grit. They have numbers on them. So you may see numbers like 50, 80, 120, 220. That tells you how smooth or how rough that sandpaper is. And the smaller the number, the more rough that it's going to be. Now, I would tell you guys on your projects, there was probably no reason for you to have a grit any smaller than 80. 80 is always a good starting one. And what 80 grit will do for you is if there are like big time imperfections or things like that in your wood that you need to kind of fix, it will sand over. It takes bigger chunks off, okay? So if you buy a really smooth board, you may not need to use 80 grit, but just a little bit. But like I said, it's always a good one. The next one that I would recommend that you would go to is 120. 120 is just a nice one. It gets like scratches and gets a little bit more of the imperfections out. And then I would suggest you finish up with a 220. And a 220 will get all the rest of those scratches and it gives it just a really nice, smooth finish. And like, I am a stickler for sanding. Like, I think sanding will make or break your project. And oftentimes we do not sand our projects enough. Like, it'll seem like if you sand and sand and sand and you seem like you've done it forever, like you might be halfway there. Like just keep going. Like, just keep on going. When it seems like it's just a way excess, like you're probably close to where you should be. The reason that sanding is important is because it will remove scratches. It's going to take the stains out of your wood, because sometimes they'll get like a little stain, or, you know, like sometimes you get them from the lumber company, they'll have like a little stamp or something like that on there. You don't want to see, you know, top treated choice lumber on your brand new shelf that you made. So you're going to want to get those type of things out. You know, and like I said, it does prep it for staining, and it'll allow it to take the stain a lot better. Make sure when you're staining that you go back and forth with the grain. Does everybody know what grain is? It's like looks like the movement or the lines in your wood. Pine's sometimes a little bit harder to tell which way the grain goes because it doesn't have a lot in it. But even in pine, you should be able to see it. So you want to go back and forth. You don't want to go across it this way. You don't want to go across the grain, because that's going to leave scratches, and we don't want any scratches on our wood. When you're finished sanding, then you're going to want to, if you got like an air nozzle or something, blow it off really well or wipe it down really well. You want to get all of that dust off of your project, because when you run your hand across like your kitchen table, it's smooth, right? Well, if you don't get all that dust off of there and you start doing your staining and then putting your polyurethane on, then it's going to feel real rough. It'll almost feel like sandpaper itself, and that totally defeats the purpose of why you sanded in the first place. So like I said, that brings you to staining. So your next thing that you're going to want to stain, this is going to be one that's got to be really clean. You want to make sure it's clean when you get ready to do this part. You're going to want to pick your color, all right? And keep in mind, when you're doing the staining, it's going to highlight how beautiful the wood is and how nice your project is. But if you didn't sand well enough, it's also going to show like all of your scratches or imperfections as well. So that's where this will really kind of highlight those things. But if you do a nice job, it's going to be a really pretty product. Make sure when you're looking at the different types of stain, probably the easiest one to use is going to be an oil base, like a mid-wax. You can get those even at like Walmart or any place like that. Those oil bases, though, it takes them a little longer to dry, so they're a little bit more forgiving when it comes to your wood project and cleanup, but it'll be kind of messy on your hands. So you're probably going to want to wear gloves or something like that. Don't just assume that your project is going to look like the color that's on the can itself. You may want to try it a little bit like on one of those scrap pieces that you used earlier for cutting or hammering or something like that. Because the difference between like pine and oak can be really drastic. Like there's some colors just look really, really pretty on pine, and like they, or even like look really good on oak. Most things do, but on pine they just look kind of all muddled and maybe don't look the same. But that has a lot to do with the grain that's in it as well. I would suggest pre-staining. So after you stain, I would suggest pre-staining or using like a conditioner, and this will help it to absorb and even out and not give you as many blemishes on your actual project. And you can buy a pre-conditioner. Some people, like my grandfather, he doesn't use pre-conditioner, but he will use mineral spirits and wipe over it and do that before he does his staining to have it natural. With your stain, you can either use like a natural brush or even a cloth, and you just wipe back and forth along the grain again. Like we're always wanting to go with that grain. The big thing is make sure that you put it on liberally. It means a lot, and get it covered. All right, so that way you don't have any like uneven spots. So you want to get it covered, and then what you'll do, if you want the stain to be like a really light color of that version, then you'll go ahead and wipe off any of the excess with like a dry rag. Okay, if you want it to be like a darker, like if you want a darker, rich version, then you're going to want to leave it on for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and then you're going to want to wipe it off with a dry rag. Now you can do your color. You can put a couple of layers on it if you want. Usually when I do my projects, I do just one, but that's completely up to you. That's totally a preference thing, and all yours to decide. All right, so anybody questions to this point? I know that's been a lot of information for you guys. All right, none? Okay, now, the next part of what I would do then would be
Krista, you do have a question. Genevieve has a question.
Sorry. All right, I put my head down. I didn't see you. Go ahead.
Is it possible to overstain?
It is possible to overstain. You can get too much on there, and then what happens is it makes it really uneven, and it'll give it like this really shiny, glossy look, but not in a way that you would want it to as far as like polyurethane and things go. So yeah, you can definitely overstain. It's important to, like I said, it's important to put it on liberally, and then you need to make sure you take that rag and really wipe off any of the excess that's on there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. The next thing that you can do is your polyurethane. There's different types of polyurethane. This is one of those that you paint it on. It's going to be sticky. You're not going to want to touch it with your fingers. And I would put on several coats of this. But this is one of those, it's the opposite of stain. Less is more. And when I say less is more, like each coat will have less, but you can do a lot of coats. but on each one of them, you want to make sure like it doesn't run. You're not going to want to, sorry, got a phone call there. You're not going to want to let it run. You're not going to want to touch it. You're going to want to make sure that the wood's really clean even after you do your staining, because this is the part where that dust can really get stuck in it. This is going to be your final, finish. And a little trick that you can use. So let's say like I put a coat of polyurethane on it tonight. Then tomorrow morning, what I do is I take a really, really fine piece of steel wool, and just gently, very, very gently, because I don't want to take off all of my polyurethane. I definitely don't want to get all the way down to my stain. I just rub over it just slightly. And if you rub your hand back over it, you'll notice that that piece is smooth. And then I really blow it off and wipe it off. And then I put on my next layer. But the more layers and the, little bit, just slightly, you can overdo it. It might be one of those things. That's one of those skills you may want to practice before you do it on your final project, is, using a little bit of that steel wool, the really fine stuff, and that will give it a beautiful, shiny finish, and it'll make sure it gets all of those, like say you had a little piece of dust or imperfection or something on there, it will get that off for you. Then comes the next part. So I always recommend that you glue your project. All right, so you're probably thinking, I know like a lot of people will put their project together and then they'll do the stain and polyurethane. I do the stain, I do the polyurethane, and then I attach my project. I don't want there to be like those little cracks or parts where you can see that aren't stained, and this way it will be a more cohesive project. But I do glue. Now you can get carried away with glue, and you can also keep in mind glue can stain your project too, so you have to be really careful with it, but it's a really good thing. So a little trick of what I do is I clamp my project together, okay, and then I will take masking tape and I put masking tape down each, like in the corner where the groove is, where I'm wanting to attach it, and I take a knife and slit that, so you've got like that corner that you're wanting to attach. It's got tape on this side, it has tape on this side, cut down through there. Then once I have that tape in place, I unclamp it, I put the glue on, and I'm going to put it together at that point. So what's going to happen is that excess glue is going to ooze out in between, where those joints, but instead of going all over my project, it's going to go on that tape. And so then all I have to do is, before it dries, I just remove that tape off of there, and that'll keep it from staining my project. And it'll also keep it from having to wipe like a whole lot of excess glue. But if you do see glue sticking out, even with the tape, just take a little damp cloth and wipe down through there, because you want to make sure you get all that off of there. You don't want it to be showing, but like I said, it is a necessity. And then at that point, then you're going to be able to go ahead and attach. So since you guys are doing the first project and it has the hand things, a lot of what you're going to be using would either be like pre-drilling holes and using a screwdriver to screw in, or nails. And a lot of people use nails on this one, so I did want to cover the hammer real quick. So a lot of people think they know how to use a hammer. I mean, we look at it, we pick it up, you just hit it with something, right? Close, but not exactly. So you want to make sure you get the right hammer for the job. A lot of people have, like the hammer that's got like the little claw hammer. Everybody have one of those probably at their house, at least one. Yep. So there are some, that's kind of like the general sort of catch-all type of hammer. I have one of those at home too. But then like I have children, and like that's really heavy for them, and it may even be a little bit heavy for you guys too, at least starting out. So you can actually get those type of hammers, but lighter versions of it. So I may recommend that for your first using it. Is if it's a little too much, if it's really awkward, you may get like smaller, lighter versions. But there's all kinds of hammers. There's like ball peen hammers, they're used for metal. Tacking hammers would be for like little tiny nails. So depending on your project, if you're doing something that maybe needs something more like a brad nail, like a tiny nail, then you might use a tacking hammer as opposed to the other. But depending on what you're using will depend on what kind of a hammer. You make sure, like, even though you're hammering, you think like, oh, that's not that big a deal, make sure you're wearing your safety glasses, because those little nails, they can flip up, and you do not want them to hit them in your eye. The next thing, when you go to hold, so a lot of people will like hold their hammer. Let's see here, I got straw here. We'll say this is my hammer. They'll hold it like up here, like they choke up on it. that's the opposite. You actually want to come all the way down to the edge like this when you're holding your hammer. Okay, so don't choke up all the way down. Then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to hold your nail. Now, a lot of people, or have you guys ever like smashed your finger or anything like that using a hammer and nails, or seen people do it? No. Well, when you hold it, don't hold it next to the wood. Hold it close to the top of the nail. Not on top of it, close to the top of
Krista,
it.
you have 106 seconds.
Oh, right.
Okay.
Like this, hammer it square. That's pretty much actually it. Make sure if it's something that keeps like splitting your wood, then you may want to do a little bit of a pre-drill and then nail it in there. But other than that, that was literally all I had.
Any questions real quick before we will get kicked back out of the room?
Yeah.
Should we rejoin the meeting after we get kicked out?
No, it'll take you right back to the meeting.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you.
Well, then I will.
Hopefully,
Go ahead.
Do you get to pick what your project is, or does it give like a recommendation in the book?
It gives recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.